The rusty alarm clock screamed at 5:47 a.m., just like every other morning on Beltraxis 3. But Darren Holt had no idea that in exactly 37 minutes, his lonely life would change forever. He had no clue that two scared alien girls were already shivering outside his door, waiting for anyone to show them kindness. Two alien girls had no home, no clothes, no hope. Until a human said, "Both of you, come home." The poisoned earth wind on Beltraxis 3 was always nasty. It carried poison from the factories above, drifting down like a curse with the night fog. The air was sharp and oily, burning your throat when you breathed. It stuck to everything: walls, windows, skin, leaving behind a thin coat of chemical ice that made your breath turn to steam even when it wasn't that cold. Down here in the steel gutters of the middle levels, in the broken ruins of Old District 9, nobody cared about names. Nobody followed rules. The lights flickered on and off like dying stars. Law was just a memory, and if you wanted to stay safe, you better have strong locks and rusty bolts on your door. Darren Holt had learned all this the hard way. Real hard. He came to Beltraxis 3 5 long years ago. Before that, he worked the asteroid mines until everything went wrong. A mining rig collapsed one terrible day, crushing 6 good men and breaking both bones in his left leg so bad they never healed right. The company gave him some money, they called it a pension, but it wasn't enough to buy a bed on the nice moons where rich people lived. So he found this place. A patch of dirt and twisted metal that nobody else wanted. Now he spent his days fixing broken things. Power cells that wouldn't charge. Cooling systems that ran too hot. Transport parts that wouldn't move. Machines were easy to understand. They didn't scream when they broke. They didn't bleed. And they never expected you to smile or pretend everything was okay. The metal box he called home, his shop, was simple, just a box made of welded metal sheets and rusty scraps, squeezed tight between 2 collapsed buildings. It leaked when it rained, but it stayed warm enough if you didn't mind the smell of old oil and burning plastic. Outside, steam hissed from the plasma vents under the fog. Neon signs buzzed and sparked across the rooftops like angry insects, casting weird colored shadows that danced in the mist. It was just after sunrise when Darren saw them. He stepped outside to use the bathroom. There wasn't one inside his little shop and caught something moving under the broken awning beside his door. At first, he thought it was just garbage. Maybe some old fabric someone threw away, or a torn piece of insulation wrap blowing in the wind. But then it moved again, and he realized it wasn't garbage at all. He stopped breathing, focused his eyes, looked closer. 2 girls were hiding there, huddled together like scared animals. Small, shivering, and definitely not human. First contact, Darren took one slow, careful step forward. His boots made a scraping sound on the wet concrete. The noise was loud in the morning quiet. The taller girl snapped upright instantly, moving like lightning. She crouched in a fighting stance, using one arm to shield the smaller girl behind her. Her skin was pale green, so pale it looked almost white, like frost. Her black hair was cut short and messy, with bright purple streaks running through it like spilled paint. Her eyes were golden yellow and shaped like a cat's, narrow and alert. Darren recognized the look. She was Dendrick, one of those alien species that got changed during the old wars decades ago. The way she held herself, tense and ready to fight, told him she had training. She was defensive but not beaten. Not yet. She didn't say a word, just stared at him with those strange, beautiful eyes. The smaller girl clung to her from behind. Same green-tinted skin, but her face was rounder, softer. Long silver blonde hair fell down her back in tangles, sticking to her bare shoulders. Her arms were wrapped tight around the taller girl's waist, her fingers white from gripping so hard. Both girls were almost nothing. Just scraps, really. Torn pieces of fancy cloth, thin strips that barely covered their chests and thighs. It looked like ceremonial clothing, the kind worn in temples or sold at auctions. Not real clothes. Not protection from the cold. This was display clothing. Slave clothing. Understanding Dardy's mind started working fast, putting pieces together. Like fixing a broken machine. They weren't from around here. Locals would know better than to dress like that. They weren't tourists. No tourist would end up in this part of the city. And nobody wore ceremonial rags in District 9 unless they were trying to hide from someone. Or unless someone had dumped them here and didn't care if they lived or died. His guess. Someone had owned them. Someone had dressed them up like pretty objects. And then, for whatever reason, that someone had thrown them away like broken toys. He didn't speak right away. If he scared them, they might run. And running in this neighborhood, dressed like that, with no money and no protection, that was the same as signing their death warrant. So instead, he walked slowly to his shop door, unlocked the heavy steel plate that served as both door and security, pushed it open so they could see inside. Warmth, light, safety. He looked back at them once. "You can come in," he said. His voice was low and steady, the same tone he used when talking to frightened animals. "Both of you." No movement. They just stared. "I'm not calling anyone," he added quickly, "but I won't leave the door open forever." He stepped inside and left the door slightly open, just enough for them to see it was safe, but not so much that anyone walking by could see inside. 10 seconds passed, then 15, then 20. Then he heard soft footsteps on concrete. Inside the sanctuary, they followed him inside like ghosts, silent and careful. The air was warmer here, though not by much. An old heater buzzed from where it hung on the wall. Strips of salvaged LED lights lit up the workbenches with harsh white glare. Tools lined the walls in neat rows: wrenches, welders, diagnostic equipment. A disassembled mining drone sat on the floor, its metal guts spread open like a patient in the middle of surgery. Past a hanging curtain that divided the space, there was a small cot, a half-working kitchen unit, and a wash sink bolted to the corner. It wasn't much, but it was clean and dry and safe. Darren didn't look directly at the girls as he moved around. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he pulled 2 oversized work shirts from a storage crate, his own shirts, clean but worn, and set them on the edge of the counter near the heater. Then he walked to the sink and turned the water handle, tested the temperature with his hand. "Still warm," he said without looking at them. "Wash if you want to." He gestured toward a shelf. "Food over there. Don't break anything." The girls still hadn't spoken. They just stood frozen near the door, watching everything with wide, scared eyes. The taller one moved first. She was clearly the protector, the one making decisions for both of them. She picked up one of the shirts with one hand while keeping the other arm ready to shield her companion. She sniffed the fabric, checking for traps, maybe, or just making sure it was clean. She looked around the room one more time, checking corners and exits. Then she led the smaller girl toward the sink. They moved like wild animals, careful, quiet, always watching for danger. The sound of Hopethy, sound of running water filled the silence. Wet cloth being wrung out, quiet breathing, the soft rustle of fabric as they cleaned themselves and put on the shirts that were way too big for their small frames. Darren went back to his workbench and sat down with his back to them. He picked up the same circuit board he'd been welding the night before and started working on it again. His hands were steady, but his thoughts were racing. Where did they come from? How long had they been hiding outside? Why hadn't they run when he spoke to them? Who had hurt them? Who had owned them? He had a dozen questions burning in his mind. He asked none of them. When he looked again, just a quick glance over his shoulder, they were curled up together on the cot, still wearing his oversized shirts, hair still damp from washing. The smaller one had fallen asleep, her head tucked safely beneath the taller girl's chin, but the taller girl stayed awake. She stared at him the entire time, those golden cat eyes never blinking, never relaxing. She was still on guard, still protecting her friend, still waiting for the trap to spring. Unwelcome visitors. It was mid-morning when someone started banging on the outer shutter. "Hey, Holt, you open?" Darren didn't move from his workbench. He recognized the voice immediately. Grin Malvik, a local scavenger and dealer with connections to the underground auction routes. Always looking for salvage. Always looking for women. Especially pretty alien women he could sell. Darren stood up slowly and opened the small communication slot in the door. "Closed today," he called back. "Try Sector 11. "Funny thing, Holt." Grin's voice carried that oily tone that meant trouble. "I'm hearing interesting rumors. 2 dendrics on the loose. Shiny skin. Real pretty. Untagged, if you know what I mean." Darren's jaw tightened. "What of it? You seen anyone like that?" Pair of ferals could be worth a month's fuel payment if someone turned them into the right people. Behind him, Darren heard the soft sound of movement. The girls were hiding now, probably behind his workbench. He grabbed a heavy wrench from the tool wall and stepped outside, shutting the inner door behind him. He stood face to face with Grin in the alley. "They're not here," he said flatly. Grin tried to look past him through the crack in the door. "Not yet. Maybe. But if they show up, Darren raised the wrench and tapped it against the steel doorframe once. The sound echoed down the alley like a gunshot. "Try Sector 11, he repeated, his voice cold as space. Grin raised his hands with a nervous laugh. All right, just asking. No need to get violent." He left without pushing it further. Grin was a scavenger, not a fighter. He picked on the weak and defenseless, not on men with tools and bad tempers. Building trust, Darren bolted the shutter tight and turned around. The girls were hiding behind the workbench now, eyes wide with terror. The smaller one's lips were trembling. She whispered something soft and musical words in Dendrick that he couldn't understand. The older girl kept her eyes locked on his face, reading his expression, trying to figure out if he was the enemy now. He set the wrench down carefully where they could see it. "No one's coming in here without going through me," he said quietly. They didn't answer, but this time he saw the tension in the taller girl's shoulders ease just a little bit. Not much, but enough to notice. The long night later that night, Darren found them asleep again. This time they were curled tighter together, but they looked less like they were expecting to be dragged away in the middle of the night. He sat in his work chair with his hands resting on his knees, watching the soft, red glow of the heater cast moving shadows across the floor. He didn't know why he had let them in, didn't know what would happen next, but he'd seen what this world did to people who had nothing, no clothes, no home, no hope. Tonight at least, he could stop that from happening again. The silence in the shop wasn't empty. It was tight and controlled and tense, like a live wire, stretched between three people who didn't fully trust each other yet. Darren slept sitting up in his work chair again, arms folded across his chest, one eye always half open. Across the room, the two girls still occupied the cot, tangled beneath a thermal blanket he'd thrown over them sometime around midnight. He hadn't meant to stare at them while they slept, but he did occasionally, just enough to track their breathing, just enough to make sure they were still there and still safe. A new morning came slowly on Veltraxis 3. Light filtered through metal window blinds and industrial haze, painting everything in shades of gray and yellow. Darren stood up, rolled his stiff shoulders, and quietly moved to the small kitchen area. He heated up flash ration packs and made strong synthetic coffee enough to take the edge off the cold and wake up his brain. This time, instead of just leaving their cups by the heater, he made 3 and walked over to the cot. He set one cup on the storage crate beside where they slept and waited. The smaller one he decided to call her Lynn because she reminded him of a girl he once knew on the lunar mining rigs. Blinked awake first. Her sea blue eyes still had that far off, dreamy look of someone who wasn't sure if she was awake or still dreaming. She smelled the coffee before she moved. Then her hand reached for it slowly, like she was expecting someone to snatch it away at the last second. The taller one sat up behind her, just as careful, still tense, still watching everything. "I don't want anything from you," Darren said plainly. "You drink that, you stay warm, you rest. That's it." That should have calmed them down. It didn't. The wild one he'd heard slavers call girls like her Rava back when he was younger and dumber and still thought he could save everyone. Tilted her head in a way that wasn't quite human. She wasn't blinking much, just studying him, like she was still waiting for a price tag to fall out of his mouth. "I don't run a shelter," Darren added, "but you don't owe me anything either. Not food, not skin, not words." Rava's shoulders loosened a little. Not much, but enough that she let Lynn lean fully against her side. Now he could see bruising, faint purple marks around her ribs and hip beneath the oversized shirt, thin red lines on her wrists, restraint marks from auction collars. Maybe someone had tried to dress her up like merchandise, someone who deserved worse than just pain. He didn't ask where they came from, not yet, but the question hung in the air like smoke. First words Lynn finally spoke. Her voice was soft and unused, like she hadn't talked to anyone in a long time. "Are you going to turn us in?" "No," Darren answered immediately, firm and certain. "Why?" she asked. Rava stiffened behind her, ready to run if the answer was wrong. "You don't even know us." He leaned against the workbench, took a sip from his coffee cup, and looked her straight in the eye. "Neither did the people who left you outside in the cold." That was enough for me. That stopped them. Not in a dramatic way, but in the small, invisible shift of how they sat. Less curled up in fear, more human. Lynn looked down at the coffee again, blinking like she wasn't sure she was really awake. Rava didn't say a word. She never had, but her breathing had steadied into something more normal. Making Speiche spent the rest of the morning clearing out a space in the corner of the shop, pulled out a backup heater from under his tool storage, found an extra set of blankets still sealed from the last supply drop, laid everything out in a quiet routine, not to show off, just to give them something they could choose, a corner that was theirs, not his. Space mattered when you'd been treated like property. They didn't thank him for the setup. He didn't expect them to. Midday brought the sound of footsteps outside, someone walking slow along the alley, heavy tread to men, one lighter, one heavier. Their voices were low and careful, but Darren's walls weren't thick enough to block out the conversation. Shop's still open. Heard he's got company. 2 girls, Dendrick maybe. Think he's keeping them for himself? Maybe. Or maybe he's planning to sell them. Either way, the voices faded as they moved on, but the message was clear. Word was getting around. People were starting to notice. Lynn looked up at him with those big blue eyes, and he could see the fear creeping back in. We should go, she whispered. No, Darren said firmly. You should stay right here where it's safe. But he was already reaching for his tool belt, checking his weapons, planning for trouble, because trouble was definitely coming. Flinched Rava was already up barefoot but moving toward the window, slit silent like a knife. Darren caught her arm before she got too close. They're just talking, he said. If they knock, I'll handle it. Rava pulled back, her eyes narrow with tension, but not defiance. Darren had to make a call then, not just for their safety, but for the future. If they stayed, someone would come knocking. Like grin. Malvik didn't forget a lead. And the girls? He could see it now, weren't just runaways. They were escapes. He needed to know the full truth. When Thali was clear, he returned to the cot, sat across from them on the floor. No desk between them, no tools in hand, just them, tired, quiet and direct. Tell me what happened, he said. Where you came from. Was looking for you. Lynn looked at Rava. Rava stared at him long and hard. Then finally she spoke. Her voice was rough, dry, almost amused. They bought us for a diplomat, a breeder. Sweet, high-tier party guest. Changed his mind. Said I was too wild. Said she was too soft. Her jaw clenched. They dumped us outside a cargo depot 3 nights ago. No credits, no tags. We ran. Darren didn't react visibly, but something shifted behind his ribs. You were tagged? Rava shook her head. No implants. We were new stock, undocumented. Then, they'll be looking, he said. Hardly always do, Rava answered. Until we're chained again. That made the decision for him. We'll fix that. Lynn looked up, confused. Fix what? Their access to you, Darren said. No name, no record, no caller. Then you'll get names. Records a family file. I've done it before. Why would you do that? Rava asked. Because I can, Darren replied. Because no one else will. The heater buzzed in the corner. Outside, fog crept through the alley again, thick and low. But inside the shop, for the first time, the cold didn't feel so sharp. Later that evening, he walked into the back room and returned with 2 thermal shirts, oversized and stitched with repair patches. He laid them on the cot. You're not just hiding here, he said. You live here now. If you want it. Lynn blinked fast, like she was holding back something she didn't understand. Rabbit didn't move, but an hour later he heard the cot shift. They were both wearing the shirts. No one spoke the word safe, not yet, but it hung in the air, unspoken, like breath. Held just a little longer each time they looked at him, and didn't flinch like trust. Learning how to wake up the next day came cold and gray outside. The mist was thicker than usual, blurring the street like a half-forgotten memory. Darren reinforced the shutter bolts and checked the silent perimeter cams. No movement, just rust, steam, and a wind scraping metal against concrete. Inside the shop, the heater hummed steadily. The smell of soldered copper lingered in the air. He worked quietly, fingers moving over a broken circuit hub, but his attention wasn't on the wires. Rava and Lynn sat at the edge off the cot, dressed now in layered thermal clothes, hair still damp from washing. They didn't speak much, but they no longer avoided his eyes. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't defensive, it was full of weight, waiting maybe for something to come loose. Rava was the first to break it. You want to know more? She said flatly. You're waiting. Darren looked up, but didn't deny it. Only if you want to tell it. She gave a small nod. Not out of submission, but as if choosing deliberately to be understood. We're not sisters, she began. Not by blood. She sat back, crossed her arms. Lynn watched. Her from beside the heater curled with her knees to her chest. I was taken from Valari Prime jungle mining outpost. My mother was a botanist civilian. One day she didn't come home. Next day slavers stormed the sector. They wanted strong-boned females, ones who wouldn't break under pressure. I was 12. She didn't blink as she spoke. Her voice stayed dry, steady. They put us in a CAS program. No implants, no IDs. We were trained to walk pretty, obey commands, breathe quiet. When he started fighting back, they stopped training and started showing. They broke my ribs, twice burned my arm, but I kept breathing quietly. She lifted her shirt slightly, showing faint scar patterns below her ribs. Darren didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, but he didn't look away. They sold me twice. I escaped once. The second buyer tried to drug me. I broke his jaw with a chair leg and ran. Darren watched her silently. Rava looked over at Lynn. She found me. Lynn's voice came softer, cautious. I was raised in a temple facility on Elrond's moon for the cast too. They told us if we served well, we'd be chosen as companions. Blessed. I believed it. She hesitated. I was too soft, too slow. They said I wouldn't survive the off-world contracts, so they put me in a secondary path storage. That means waiting in small cages, no windows, no clocks, just heat lamps and injection schedules. Darren's jaw tightened. I don't remember when I stopped talking, she continued, but one day they brought Ravi and said we were match set. She didn't even look at me. Note at first, but I kept trying to get close. I didn't want to be alone anymore. Ravotted quietly. She's the reason I didn't kill the handler that night. Darren leaned back in his chair, processing Thejas. You were delivered as a pair. Raven nodded. Once we were dressed in silks and dusted with sleep powder, taken to a diplomat suite. He never touched us. Hell looked at me, said I had predator eyes, then dismissed both of us as defective. We're dumped in a freight zone 3 blocks from here. Darren ran a hand over his beard, rough stubble catching his fingers. That was 4 nights ago, 3.5. How did you survive? I stole a burner cloak from a dead scoff. Lynn found a leaking radiator behind a vendor stall. We ate paste scraps from her fuse tubes, then we saw the heat coming from your bay. You didn't chase us off. He thought for a long moment, every word aligned with the bruises, the hesitation, the silence. You have no trace implants, no biometric tags. Rava shook her head. We were off record and documented. Stock is common in the outer caste markets. Easier to sell when no one's asking. Darren turned to the data panel mounted near his bench, brought up the blank family registry request form. He didn't type yet, just stared. I'll start the paperwork tonight, he said. A fake household certificate, dependency claim, and biometric stub records. You'll need new names. Rab raised an eyebrow. What for? Because next time someone comes looking, I want them to find an official file, not to ghosts. Lynn looked confused. You'd register us as family? Yes. For what reason? Because out here paper matters more than blood. With the right documents, I can make you real. Ravi studied him for a long second. You'd lie for us. I've lied for worse. She didn't thank him. She just stood, walked across the room, and leaned against the doorframe, watching the street through the thin slit in the steel shutter. If they find us, they'll bring net stunners restraints. Then I'll build faster locks. Darren said simply. Lynn exhaled, voice barely audible. You're not like the others. Darren died in Trespin that night. While the girls slept curled under patch blankets, he stayed up at his console, typing, modifying, forging. Years of off-record tech work came in handy now. Old contacts, forgotten admin keys. A false registry file took 6 horsebit. When it was done, it was clean. Clean enough to fool any standard scan. Ravel Tratraxis. Registered dependent rescued from unsanctioned off-world labor camp. Linville Traxis. Same file documented emotional trauma from caste conditioning. Both dependent of Darren Hall, mechanic, local citizen. He read it once, then saved it, burned a backup. He didn't know exactly what they were to him. Not yet. But tomorrow they'd be harder to take in. That was enough for now. The rain came without warning. Beltraxis 3 didn't they've real weather, just runoff from broken skyscrapers, chemical mist bleeding from cooling towers, and artificial condensation leaking off the upper tiers. But tonight the downpour felt real, heavy, relentless. It slammed the roof panels in a regular rhythm, like fists on metal. Inside, Darren locked down shutters early. The street was too quiet. His gut told him something was off. Rava was at the workbench again, sharpening a salvage scrap blade with a piece of wire mesh. She didn't ask for permission. She never did. She watched the door like it owed her a debt. Lynn sat beside the heater, wrapped in the oversized coat Darren had given her the day before, watching condensation beat across the window slit. She hadn't spoken all day, not since the food run. Darren returned from the back room with a sealed ration box and a low signal transmitter in his hand. Store Frantocris, the alley. Got hit last night, he said. Tool crate's gone. No prints, no cams. Another girl reacted right away. Means someone checking the area quietly. Ravaten's scouts? Could be looters. Could Be worse, he tossed the transmitter onto the table. Either way we prep, no one's dragging you out of here without a fight. You said we were ghosts, Lynn whispered. Ghosts don't get chased. Darren crouched beside her. That was true. Now you've got names. That makes you valuable again. And that means someone might want to put you back on a leash. She lowered her eyes, pulled the coat tighter around her. What will you do if they come? She asked. Depends how they knock. Rava let out a dry, humorless breath. You'll get hurt for us. I've been hurt for less. Later the storm settled into a steady hiss. They didn't speak much after that. Darren took first watch, sitting by the door with a modified wrench rifle in his lap. The silence wasn't awkward. It was waiting, calculated, like everyone was preparing for something, even if they didn't know what it was. Closed Tom at night when it happened. A sound too soft for ordinary footsteps, but too heavy to be wind. Darren stood. Instant lithe girls were already alert. Rava had her blade in hand. Lynn stayed low, eyes wide. Darren moved toward the rear access hatch. Barely used, rusted at the edges. He pressed his ear to the frame. Click, not wind. Someone was picking the lock. He turned and whispered sharply, "Back corner, stay low." Rabbit didn't argue. She pulled Lynn behind a stack of storage crates. Darren grabbed the manual override bar from under the tool rack and locked it into place. A sharpness came through the seam. Someone jamming a thermal blade into the seal. Darren didn't wait. Kicked the hatch, hard metal crashing into whatever was outside, and fire a shot from the wrench rifle through the frame. A scream, then retreating boots. He didn't chase. Instead, he waited. 10 full minutes passed before he removed the override bar. He checked the alley. Empty, just puddles and mist. When he returned inside, Lynn was shaking. Rava held her tight, whispering something in a language Darren didn't recognize. Low, steady, reassuring. Her voice sounded different, softer. Darren lowered the rifle, breathing hard, sweat trickling down his temple despite the cold. Just a scout, Hazade, but they'll come back. Rava met his eyes. You should have let them open the door. I could have handled it. You're not killing anyone unless we have no other choice, he said firmly. You're not an animal. I don't care what they called you before. That made her blink. Her mouth opened, then shut again. He walked toward her, slowly lowered his voice. You're safe here. I'm in it. Rabbit didn't look away. Her breathing was steady, but her hands trembled just slightly. Darren noticed it. So did she when she spoke again. It wasn't aggressive. Why does this matter to you? He hesitated. I didn't stop the last girl I saw taken. This time I did. The words hung in the air. Rava reached forward, suddenly not aggressive, just slow, deliberate. Her fingers brushed the side of his hand. Darren didn't flinch. She held it there, light and testing, like touching warmth for the first time. Lynn watched silently. Something changed in that moment. No words, just the space between bodies narrowing. No pressure, no rush. But something passed between all three of them. A question not yet asked, an answer not yet given. Darren pulled in a breath. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we move the backup shelter into the lower storage bay. This place isn't safe anymore. They nodded, no protest. He turned to leave, but just before he reached his bunk he heard it. Lynn's voice, soft and almost a quiet. You didn't stop the last one, but you didn't run from us either. He stopped, then noted once the rain kept falling, but inside, they didn't feel like ghosts anymore. The storm passed by morning, but the sky stayed bruised. The streets were soaked in runoff, and the upper level mist hung low, like it was waiting to sink deeper. Darren stood at the rear shutter watching. The alley through a crack in the steel, no movement, no shadows, but he didn't relax. The shop was too exposed now. The break-in attempt made that clear. They needed backup spacia, fallback. The old storage bay below the floor had been sealed for years, half flooded and cold, packed with rusted drone parts and broken shelving. But it had a second access hatch through the side wall, hidden by collapsed machinery that made it valuable. He spent the next hour clearing the upper grate. Rava joined without being asked. She didn't say much, just rolled up her sleeves and moved crates like they weighed nothing. Lynn stayed upstairs with the burner kettle quiet, folding the thermal shirts and laying them across the heater rail so dry. She kept watching the stairwell. They all knew things weren't calm anymore. The illusion had cracked. When they were done, the lower bay smelled like oil and rot, but it was dry enough and the lights still worked. Darren brought down the bedding. Rava followed with supplies. Lynn came last, arms full of blankets that still carried the warmth of the heater. Later, after they settled in, Darren sat on a plastic crate working a fusion cutter with his gloves half in. Ravis stood near the open pipeline, arms crossed, her scarred, back leaning against a crate. You were military, she said. He looked up, then back down at the cutter. No, you carry yourself like someone who's killed before. He didn't answer right away, then he said, does it matter? It does to me. He clicked off the tool, looked her in the eye. Mining accident, lost people I had to carry, the ones that didn't make it. That changes the way you walk, it stays in your spine. Rava nodded slowly, her tone softened. That's why you don't flinch even when I get too close. You didn't smile. I learned not to waste a breath. Rava stepped forward. Shouldn't crowd him, just cross the space with slow, deliberate movement. Close enough for her scent to reach him like burnt spice and old metal. Her hand brushed his arm like, not a tease. A test. You haven't tried to touch me, she said. Not even once. You expected me to. Everyone always does. You met her eyes steady. I don't take things. If you ever jive me something, I'll wait until you mean it. She held his gaze, then looked down. That was the first time she stepped back willingly that night. Water ran short. The heat sink upstairs had been cracked during the storm, and Darren had to reroute the intake through the old backup purifier. It meant cleaning the girls' bodies became more difficult but necessary. He brought down a basin, filled it with warmed water, and set it in the center of the floor. Lynn hesitated at first, but when Darren turned his back to work on the terminal, she moved forward and slipped her shirt off. Her ribs showed soft and smooth, but marked faintly by bruises now turning yellow. She dipped a rag, carefully dabbing her arms and collarbone. Her shoulders rosy and fell with shallow breath. Then she paused, looked at Darren's back. Can you use one of your clean shirts? She asked, voice low. He nodded, top crate folded. Chest stood dripping, and crossed the space behind him. He didn't turn. She took the shirt, hesitated. Then, without warning, pressed her forehead to his shoulder. Not erotic, not calculated, just contact. Really don't want to feel ashamed anymore, she whispered. You shouldn't have to, he said. Being them. Rava sat watching. She didn't interfere, but when Lynn finally moved back to the blankets, Rava followed. Shouldn't take off her own clothes, but she pulled off her outer layer and dipped her arms into the cooling basin. Then she looked at Darren again. If I ever touch you, she said plainly, it won't be Bako same broken. We're afraid. It'll be because I want to. I know, he answered. She nodded once. And I think I will. Darren didn't move, didn't breathe for a second, but deep down, something shifted. Not hunger, hope. That night, they all lay close under the same blanket for warmth. At first that was the reason, they told themselves, but the space between them vanished faster than the cold. Lynn pressed herself against his chest, sighing into his shirt. Ravel behind him, not touching, but close enough for her breath to kiss his neck. He didn't sleep for hours, and when he finally closed his eyes, he wasn't alone anymore. The warning came too late. Darren picked up a signal from a hacked maintenance drone that morning, faint and coded, masked as shipping chatter. But buried inside the static was a name and not his Ravis. A voice on the loop said, live return preferred, no visible injuries. Original buyers notified. That was all he needed to hear. He powered down the unit, pulled the battery from the transmitter, and sealed the casing in resin. Then he walked down to the storage bay, where the girls were quietly eating from a heat pack ration tray. Lynn was barefoot again, wrapped in none of his jackets. Rava was sharpening a screwdriver into a narrow spike. Neither of them looked surprised when they saw his face. They're coming, he said. How many? Rava asked. Too many to fight. Rava nodded once, calm. Then we run to Rendon argue. He knelt beside the gear crates and pulled out the emergency packs he hadn't touched in 5 years. Thermal cloaks, backup IDs, stem tablets. He threw one to Rava, another to Lynn. Neither flinched. Lynn clutched the cloak tightly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Will they take us apart? Separate us? No, Darren said. Not while I'm alive. They didn't doubt him. The plan was rough, no time for precision. They would cut through the lower vent shaft, under the repair bay, crawl 3 meters into the old filtration tunnels, then exit through the abandoned tram junction 3 blocks east. Darren had stashed an old cargo hauler there years ago, half buried under discarded scaffolding. It still had a fuel cell. If it worked, they'd be off-grid within 10 minutes if Ravel went first. Knife tucked under her belt, Lynn followed, hands shaking as she crawled. Darren moved last, welding the hatch shut behind them before he dropped into the vent. The space was narrow, loud, the metal groaned underweight. Halfway through, they heard boots above them, Multiple pairs. Ravis stopped, turned back, eyes glowing in the dark. Darren shook his head. Keep moving. She hesitated, then obeyed. At the exit, he pushed the panel open slowly. No patrols yet. Just smoke, trash-strewn lanes, red emergency light bouncing off damp concrete. They ran, not fast. Smart one turn. 2 alleys down a collapsed stairwell into the tram. Lot the hauler was still there, buried under cloth and scaffolding. Darren ripped off the tarp and slammed his palm on the access pad. It opened. Inside was cramped, dust-choked, cold but safe for now. They crawled in, doors sealed, engines, hum. He keyed. In Thebern code coordinates flickered on the dash. We got 20 minutes, he said. After that, we're dark. Lynn slumped to the floor, arms wrapped around her knees. She was trembling hard. Rava pulled her close, whispering something but her own. Hands hooked. Darren sat across from him, knees pulled up, watching both. He'd seen survivors before, dozens, hundreds, but never like this. Never. Ones who looked at him, not with fear, not with suspicion, but with something else. Belief. After a moment, Ravel looked up. You could have run alone. I would have died alone. You risked everything for us. You're nothings, he said. You're not property. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine. Ravi stared at him, then slowly she crawled forward. She didn't rush, didn't ask. She just reached for his hand. He let her. Then Lynn moved too. Silent, eyes glassy, she curled beside him, head on his shoulder, fingers brushing his chest. Darren wrapped an arm around her, Puladrava close with the other. No words, just closeness. They didn't kiss. Not yet. It wasn't about that. It was about being held, being claimed. The three of them lay in the dark of the holler as the engine warmed, bodies touching, breathing, sinking heat rising slowly between layers of old cloth and scarred skin. Rava whispered when. This is over. It is over, Darren said. No, she corrected. When we fin somewhere new, I want more. He looked at her. You'll have it, he said. Both of you. Lynn nodded against his shoulder. I don't want to be afraid when I reach for you. You won't be. She lifted. Her face kissed his neck, light, warm, trembling. Rava kissed his other side, no hesitation. Darren closed his eyes, not because he was afraid, but because it was finally safe too. The hauler lifted. They left Valraxis 3 behind together. 3 weeks later, they landed on Have Station, a forgotten mining colony turned freehold zone, tucked along the rim of neutral space. No customs, no slaver contracts, no caste registries, just silence, old tunnels and long winters. Darren bartered the hauler for a housing unit near the edge of the dome. A metal frame shelter with insulated walls, one working. Solar patterned a clean water line. Nothing elegant, but it had a door that locked from the inside, a working heater, and enough room for 3 people to live like they were allowed to belong. They didn't talk about Valtraxis anymore. There was nothing left to say. Rava spent her days outside stripping old conduits for salvageknivs, always close, boots covered in red dust. She moved with quiet focus. Now her tension hadn't vanished, but it had softened, shaped into control purposes. All the time she watched the dome horizon and said nothing for hours. Lynn helped Darren rewire the roof panel grid, shushing softly when she thought no one was listening. Her voice was fragile, but beautiful, and Darren never interrupted at night. She organized the supplies, cooked from ration packs, arranged clothes, then undressed with no shame. By the end of the first week, they stopped using separate blankets. By the second, no one slept alone. Now, in the third, it was her first night with no cold, no hunger and no fear that someone would kick down the door. Ravi stood by the window, steam from her shower still rising off her skin. She wore only one of Darren's old shirts, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hem barely covering her thighs. Her scars no longer looked like chains, they looked like choices. Lynn sat on the bed, bare legs tucked under, her hair damp and curling over one shoulder. Her expression was soft, waiting. She looked at Darren the way people look at someone who never let go, even when he should have. He stood in the doorway, shirt unbuttoned, hands loose at his sides. You're not afraid anymore, he said. Lynn smiled. Only off sleeping too far from you. Rava turned slowly. You said you'd wait, that you wouldn't take unless we gave. He nodded once. I meant it. She stepped forward. Then take us now, not because we owe you, but because we want you. Lynn rose across the room and kissed him. Her lips were warm, steady, full of breath and quiet. She slid her arms around his waist, bare skin brushing his stomach. Rava pressed into him from behind, her hands trailing up his chest, her mouth at his neck. Her touch wasn't demanding. It was deliberate. Her breathing matched his. They guided him to the bed, not as something to claim, but as something to share. Lynn lay back first, pulling him down, her legs curling around his. Rava followed, straddling beside him, one hand on his chest, the other stroking Lynn's thigh. The room was silent except for breath and the soft rasp of hands on skin. Heat bloomed between them, slow, tender, then deeper. They moved together without rush, without hesitation. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't sporadic. It was chosen. Lips touched. Hips shifted. Fingers traced old scar sand, new beginnings. They held him when he groaned softly into Lynn's shoulder. They gasped when his hands moved lower, gentler until both their backs arched into him. He whispered their names, not like a list, like a prayer. Rabbi kissed him hard when she came, body shuddering against his. Lynn held his hand and cried not from pain, but from release. It ended in silence, a good silence. Later they lay together in the dark, tangled under the same sheet, their sweat cooling. The dome lights dimmed. I want to stay here, Lynn whispered. We will, Darren murmured. I want a name, Ravi said, not the one they gave him. Then we'll choose one, he said. And we want yours, Lynn added. Darren turned and kissed both their foreheads. Then we'll start with hold. They slept in a real bed that night. No more corners. No more cough. Next morning the first sunlight of have broke across their bodies, stretched across linen and warmth. They didn't move. They didn't run. They found not just freedom, but a life together, and this time, no one could take it away. Not ever again. Not from them. It had been 47 days since they'd left Beltraxis 3 behind. Enough time for old habits to fade, enough time for trust to grow roots. The small house at the edge of Have Dome had become more than shelter. It was theirs, the wiring no longer. Spark Theater worked without stuttering. A vegetable patch, small but stubborn, had started taking root near the back. Hatchlin's idea. Rava reinforced the fencing with scrap metal welded into points. Nothing decorative, just strong. That morning, Darren awoke with both women wrapped around him, Rava's arm across his chest, Lynn's fingers curled into his shirt. Their breathing matched. He didn't move, not for a long while. When he finally did, he made breakfast. Queetlithi joined him, barefoot, clothed in loose homeware, simple wrap shirts and thermal shorts. Nothing made to impress, everything made to belong. Ravik kissed his cheek while stealing his coffee. Lynn rested her head on his shoulder while he rewired the comm hub to play old broadcast music. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. That afternoon they walked the outskirts. Not far, just far enough to feel the wind through the dome filter and let their feet touch the soil without worry. Rava climbed a rock ridge and shouted into the sky, just to hear her own voice echo. It was the first time Darren saw her smile without a hint of guardedness. When she jumped down, she landed next to him and took his hand without hesitation. Lynn brought back toe flowers she'd found among the dust. She pressed one in his palm, then the other into Rav's hair. They both let her. That night, they ate dinner on the floor around a heating lamp, all three leaning against each other like a tangle of flims that had stopped, remembering whose body started where. And later, after the lights dimmed and the dome outside went silent, they moved to the bed without speaking. This time there was no urgency, no fear, no survival instinct, just choice and closeness. Rava was first to reach for him. She kissed his neck, then his chest, her lips deliberate. Her shirt slipped down her arms, revealing smooth skin and the faint trace of scar over her ribs. She didn't hide it. She pressed his hand against it instead. Lynn moved slower, always gentle. She slid her leg over his, her mouth brushing his jaw, then Darren's lips, then Ravi's shoulder. Her body, soft and full, curved into fierce like she had always belonged between them. Darren kissed them both, his hands trailing down their backs, anchoring himself in every quiet gasp and every rising breath. The room was warm, dimly lit by the soft hum of the wall lamp. Outside the dome, the dust storms rolled, but here, inside their shared home, nothing moved except bodies drawn together by need, not desperation, but deep, wordless want. Rava was the first to shift, slow and fluid, like a decision unfolding. She climbed over Darren's lap, her legs straddling his hips, her knees pressed into the mattress on either side of his body. Her shirt hung open at the front, baring her chest. Her eyes met his, demanding, not playful, honest. Her fingers trailed up his jawline, pausing on the edge of his beard. She leaned in and kissed him, not softly, but completely. Darren froze for a beat, not from resistance, but from the gravity of it. Rava wasn't teasing. She wasn't testing him this time. She was offering herself fully and in her own way, asking to be seen. Her hips pressed down into his, slow and steady. Her breath caught. His hand slid along her thighs, firm and warm, grounding her. She rolled her hips again more deliberately and gasped softly, as if surprised by the heat rushing up her spine. She gripped his shoulders, forehead falling to his. I've never done this with someone safe, she whispered, her voice shaking but sure. I like how it feels when I can choose, when I can stay. You can always stay, Darren said, his voice low, steady, filled with something weightier than lust. Behind them, Lynn had moved closer. She pressed against Darren's back, her arms wrapping around him, her hands sliding across his chest, bare skin brushing his spine. Her cheek rested on his shoulder, lips barella grazing his neck as she breathed in his scent. Warm, human, clean. You feel like home, she murmured. Rava moved again, slower this time, her thighs tensing. Ash found her rhythm against him. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She wasn't rushing, she was savoring every inch of closeness, every beat of pressure, every movement she controlled. Darren's hands found her lower back, holding her steady as she began to rock with more purpose. Her eyes fluttered, closed mouth parting with each small movement. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from sheer sensation. Lynn's hands slid down, brushing Rava's hips as if to anchor her to. They moved together, not in unison, but in harmony, one leading, honor responding, all of it unspoken, all of it earned. Rava leaned forward again, resting her hands on Darren's chest, sweat gathering in the hollow of her throat. She breathed out, voice cracking. This is the first time I've ever wanted to stay on top and not be told to get off. Her body trembled again, and this time she didn't hold back the low moan that came from deep in her chest. Darren caught her, guided her, let her move exactly the way she needed. No pressure, no restraint, only rhythm, only presence. Lynn kissed the back of his neck, then Rava's shoulder, and whispered, "You're beautiful like this." Rava turned her head, their foreheads touching for a breathless second. Darren felt everything. The weight of Rav's thigh straddling him, her hips rising and falling with aching grace, Lynn's arms around his chest, her body pressing into his back, her fingers exploring slowly, not to claim, but to connect. The bed beneath him shifted with each breathiac motion, but the world outside had disappeared. When Rava finally let go, a sharp breath turning into a soft, desperate sound, she collapsed forward, resting her head on Darren's shoulder. He held her there, one arm around her waist, the other reaching behind to draw Lynn closer. And then Lynn moved in front of him, her body folding into his arms. She kissed him gently, slowly, her lips tasting like salt and warmth, and Pramasesh climbed onto his lap, pressing against Rava, skin to skin, three bodies fitting together like a single breath. "I don't want to wait anymore," she whispered. He didn't make her. They didn't move fast, they didn't need to. Fingers found skin, hands mapped curves and scars, lips brushed necks, shoulders, spines. It was patient, it was real. Lynn arched under him, her breath catching, her hands tangling in the blankets as he moved against her, into her, around her. And Rava, still catching her breath, still trembling from earlier, wrapped her arms around both of them, from behind, whispering to them, both eyes wet, voice rigged, "You're mine, both of you. And I'll kill anyone who tries to take this away." When it was over, they didn't speak. They stayed tangled together under the blankets, their skin damp, their limbs entwined, hearts slowing in sync. Darren stroked Rava's thigh with the back of his hand. Lynn curled into his chest, her lips brushing his collarbone. Outside of his station was silent. Inside, three people who had once been lost had found something no one else would ever understand. Not survival, not refuge. Lovey, and now they had all the time in the world to live it.